On today's episode, we're talking about the very important topic of self-defense for the injured, the disabled, and the elderly. This is going to be very interesting. And we're back, guys, today on Survival Dispatch podcast, talking about the topic of self-defense for the injured, the disabled, and the elderly. Topics that people have been asking us to talk about for quite some time, and we finally are. And joining me today to discuss this topic is my buddy, once again, Sal De Janeiro. Sal, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me back, Denny.
You bet. Wow, we don't hear about this topic enough. There's all kinds of content out there, a lot of it we have generated, other sources have generated on the topic of self-defense for able-bodied, healthy people like us who are able to get up, get around, do things. But lately, and we've been posting a lot of surveys, YouTube surveys, social media content, asking people quite, what do you want to know about? What do you want to hear about? And over, people are asking about, hey guys, why aren't you talking about self-defense for the disabled, self-defense for the elderly, self-defense for those of us who become injured? And I think it's a very important topic. And luckily, you being one of our awesome self-defense and concealed carry experts have some information on this topic. And I'm so thankful for you joining us today to talk about this. I think we can probably break this down into several categories, right?
Absolutely. And I think it's a testament to the knowledge of your audience that they're asking for this. It seems a lot of times in the preparedness community, everything seems to be geared for an ex-special forces guy or something like that. With that said, we know many veterans, of course, are disabled. So we kind of have a discussion about the peak of physical fitness, and that is far from the case for many, many people, of course.
Of course it is. I agree 100%. And when we kind of break this topic down, I threw out those scenarios in the beginning: the injured, the disabled, the elderly, but really we even have subcategories, because you can be permanently disabled, you can be temporarily disabled, you can have an injury that lays you up for a while or affects a certain part of your body that you may need to use to defend yourself. If you're carrying an appendix style holster, I've got my dummy gun here just to kind of demonstrate. There have been times when I myself have been, I'm just going to say, temporarily disabled or injured to the point that I could not use strong hand very well, or parts of my hand, or do certain things, or I couldn't grip appropriately. And this is a topic that I didn't think about that at that time, because when I became injured, I didn't have the pre-notions. I didn't have the ideas in my head already. So if this happens to me, what am I going to do? Man, I didn't train to shoot left-handed well often enough, or I didn't train to do non-strong hand reloads well enough. And or even if I don't have my firearm with me, my EDC pistol, how am I going to do I practice my left hand strikes or my movements or whatever I'm going to do to defend myself? So me not being disabled, me being an able-bodied person, has even experienced that to the point that, man, I wish I had studied up, read about it, studied content, listened to people, prepared myself. I just want to ask you, have you ever found yourself in a circumstance like that? And if so, what was it?
Absolutely. In fact, even within just the past year, I had an injury to my abdomen. So I changed the position of my typical AIWB carry because I just couldn't have it there. Now, in my particular case, I did not have to switch sides of the body because my dominant arm was functioning, but I switched actually where I carried the gun. So depending on the injury, for example, shoulder surgeries are very common, right? I know many, many shooters who have been several weeks or several months in the position where they had to shift everything to the opposite side of their body so that they could actually get to their gun with their support hand. So temporary injury, whether it's very temporary, a matter of days or a matter of months, is very common. And of course, a permanent disability would become a complete life incident, of course, where you would tailor your entire life going forward to that injury. But regardless of which somebody sustains, almost all human beings at some point are going to face an injury or a disability to the point where it's going to change the way you approach your own self-defense, especially when it comes to carrying defensive tools.
Very good point there. I have some notes in front of me and a lot of this information, read the articles that, by the way, folks, you're gonna hear Sal refer to some USA Carry articles. We will have the links to those articles in the description below. We encourage you to check it out. You mentioned, Sal, temporary disability or injuries may demand the changing of the location of the tools that you're using, and whatever tool that is. I don't know about you, but I keep tools all over myself in pockets. I usually have my concealed carry either in an appendix situation, like holster, like you saw just a moment ago, or over at a 4 o'clock position. I rarely even train with it out of those two positions because I see myself, or I imagine myself being able to use my non-dominant hand to reach around. But is it a good idea to train with your non-dominant hand with your concealed carry pistol? And if so, how would you address that?
Most firearms enthusiasts, most shooters, in terms of self-defense at least, and certainly most instructors, encourage a significant amount of training with the support hand, right? The non-dominant hand. If you want to call it the weak hand, that's fine. We kind of get away from that terminology because there's nothing necessarily weak about it, but it's your non-dominant hand. So you certainly want to be training with it, perhaps not as often as you're shooting with your strong hand, but certainly be training with it so that you have this competency for a couple of reasons. First of all, you may be injured in a fight or simply have one arm detained somehow in a fight where you need to resort to the support hand, but certainly dealing with a temporary injury, you may have to basically flip your tool access to the other side of your body than typical. So you certainly want to be training with the support hand for all of your defensive tools. Probably we have a firearm focused discussion here, as most people in the United States fortunately have the option to be carrying firearms. Another thing to consider, it's a good practice to keep a mirror image holster on hand. So for whatever your favorite defensive tool is, let's say you carry whatever, a Glock or a SIG pistol, that's your preferred pistol. Well, have a duplicate holster on hand. If you're right-handed, have a left-handed holster, the same exact holster, but designed for the other side of the body. That is, in my experience, the single biggest temporary injury that impacts the carry of weaponry that I see is something happening to the dominant arm. So a shoulder surgery, that's very common, an elbow surgery, a hand surgery, etc. So it's a temporary injury, perhaps to the point where it might be weeks or even months, but it may not be for the rest of your life. But at least in that interim period, to remain armed, you need to switch your defensive tools to the opposite side of the body.
Right. So two very good points there that are kind of sticking in my mind that I think if I have a couple of takeaways, if I can't watch any more of this video right now, I'm going to train with my non-dominant hand to make sure that I can manipulate my survival tools, right? My EDC, my light, my knife, whatever other tools I keep with me, and having that mirror image holster. That's something that we don't really think about because we get so used to having our equipment training with what we have, what works for us. But I will tell you, I have a variety of holsters like you, I'm sure, have a lot of different options and equipment that I like to use. And I do have a couple of holsters inside the waist holsters, and really kind of simple types that have like one clip that can be rotated around for different angles, different of the gun there. And I know I have at least one and maybe two of those that is reversible. In other words, I can take the belt clip off, move it to the other side, and really just flip that holster around. Should we look for equipment like that to save money? Do you think we're compromising ourselves to go with equipment like that? I have stuff that I swear by that's not reversible to my knowledge, and I have to look at it a little closer. Is that something you should think about doing?
So it's an added benefit. There's many top of the line holsters that are actually designed ambidextrous, and you simply put the wing and the clip, etc., on the side based on what side of the body you carry it. So that's a benefit. One thing I would just throw out is I practice keeping an actual dedicated carry holster on hand for my preferred gun for the opposite side of the body, because if something happens to my dominant hand and it's in a cast or whatever, do I really want to have to mess around with changing those clips out? Try that with a screwdriver and whatever else with just one hand. So to be honest, I'm kind of big on having an exact duplicate. Now, if you don't have a duplicate holster set up that way, obviously the ambidextrous option is going to make it very feasible, because you have a holster that will work. You'll just have to maybe get a friend or family member to switch those clips out for you. But it's good to have some means on hand to be able to switch sides of the body with your carry tools, particularly the firearm. Most other tools, you can make the switch a little bit easier, but the firearm needs a good holster, of course, and you want to have that equipment on hand, because it's almost inevitable in a human lifetime that we sustain some kind of injury that forces us to change. And with that said, we've discussed losing the functionality of the dominant hand for a period. Consider having an alternate carry mode. Back to my own personal example, I still had function of the dominant arm, but I wasn't able to carry the gun in the usual body location. I just pocket carried for a few weeks. So having an alternate carry mode is also very beneficial, because you might sustain injury that all of a sudden you can't wear anything on your waistband. For example, if you have back surgery or whatever, you may not want to have something strapped tight around your waistband. Pocket carry, even if it means carrying a smaller gun for a while, or even ankle carry, etc., may be what gets you through.
That's a great point. Earlier today, in anticipation of recording this interview with you, I was doing some of my own research and studying, really as it pertains to becoming injured, having used that non-dominant hand. And I was watching videos of guys practicing their reloads with their semi-automatic pistols one-handed with their non-dominant hand. If you think it's difficult to do it one-handed strong hand, it is quite even more difficult exponentially with your non-dominant hand. And there are a lot of specific techniques out there that I have found that you can study and watch videos, and maybe you can make some references to that as well to learn how to do that. And I myself have been lax. I have not been training. I did when I'm back in police academy when I was a young man. They trained us on that. Some of that I recall, but it's been so long. I've forgotten so much. I think that's something that I personally want to put back into my regular training regimen, at least a little bit during my dry fire practice at home, to be able to do that. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And I will admit that I don't get too wrapped around the axle as far as training reloads and malfunction clearance with support hand only. I've done it. I know the techniques. I certainly shoot quite often support hand only. But we come down to sort of the statistics thing, right? It's even quite clear in actual gunfight statistics. The need to do those things with only the dominant hand is usually more common. And as far as civilian self-defense, we rarely see the need to go to support hand anyway. It happens, but it's fairly rare. But if we're talking in terms of being prepared for a temporary disability, it becomes more and more important. Kind of my preferred technique is if you have the gun on the waistband, and what I refer to as primary carry modes, right? Either strong side or AIWB, appendix location, which when we talk about these issues, the appendix location has a lot of benefits, one of which is working with a single hand. My preferred technique, really, and the one that I show people, is when you have to reload the gun, come back to the holster. So the gun may be at slide lock. I'm going to come back to the holster and holster it, then access my magazine, load it. And then just depending on the gun in your hands, you can either let the slide forward just by hitting the release, or just run that gun, the slide off of the holster, your belt line, whatever. Right. Same thing with malfunctions. You can run that slide off of your belt, right off of your leg. These are the kind of things you want to try, of course, and be proficient with, and get good training. Don't be at a range running the slide off your leg and flagging people around you and that kind of thing. You need to seek out proper training for these kind of things. But it's techniques that are worth being at least knowledgeable about and having tried them, even if you don't spend a lot of time practicing them. Know these techniques techniques, because that way, if you find yourself with your dominant arm in a sling, for example, you're going to have that knowledge set to keep that gun running.
Yeah, really good point. I'm thinking back to a time when I learned when I started shooting with red dot optics, was learning the technique of racking my slide off of my optic, off of a barrier, or off of my belt or some other equipment, which came in really handy. Worked quite well. And most quality optics out there, even the ones I were using, pretty high grade. Spent enough money on them. I felt like I was getting that good quality and that they were sturdy and built and they were mounted correctly and the screws were torqued and all that good stuff. I felt pretty good about it. Of course, your equipment's going to get marred up a little bit. You'll have little scrapes and scratches, but I was specifically running Trigicon and Holosun products kind of back and forth, doing that and having pretty good success with that as well. Let's kind of change things up a little bit and talk about longer term disabilities, Sal, and some of the things that might come with those longer term disabilities. And one thing that you and I discussed before we went live here was the long-term disability that might change the legal obligation of avoidance and disparity of force. And that sounds like a lot of legalese. And what does that mean exactly?
Right. So if you are permanently disabled, and the truth is, even if you're temporarily disabled, things change legally for you. And what we're referring to is generally a concept in the law called disparity of force. Okay, the first thing that usually comes to people's minds is male on female violence, right? Because it is understood that the average female is significantly smaller and has less physical strength than the average male. Okay, therefore, women are not held to the same legal standard as an able-bodied male when it comes to just dealing with a simple assault, a guy who shoves you in the parking lot or throws hands, etc. Now, if you're disabled, you are immediately in a category where typically you are going to have a significant disparity of force if you are facing an able-bodied male, which most violent criminal actors are able-bodied younger males, right? So if you're wheelchair bound, for example, well, you have less mobility and you are also not expected to duke it out with an able-bodied male criminal aggressor, right? So something that would not be considered a deadly threat to another able-bodied man. Again, think of just a fist fight in a parking lot, right?
Yeah.
Typically, if you draw your gun and shoot somebody because they pushed you, even if it's quite aggressively, that's not proportional force, right? If you are in a wheelchair, you're not going to be legally expected to get thrown out of the chair and have somebody beat your brains out on the ground, right? So the truth is, when you are permanently disabled to the point where it affects your mobility or your full bodily function, you are actually legally in a position where you can likely resort to lethal force much more quickly than somebody who would not have those disabilities. So these are the things you have to know. And sometimes it's relatively jurisdictional specific. Know your laws. You need to understand the full gamut of the laws that govern the use of a force, both less lethal and lethal force. But bear that in mind that typically you're going to have a disparity of force issue where you're not going to be required under the law to duke it out with somebody who is considered physically at the same playing field, because almost any able-bodied male is going to have a significant disparity of force over you if you're disabled.
That wheelchair scenario really brings in a lot of questions to mind. What if something happened to me, to you, and we were disabled? What if we couldn't use certain parts of our body and we were destined to live the rest of our lives, or a long part of our life, rest of our life, in a wheelchair? And that brings about the question of, are there specific strategies for carry and deployment of self-defense tools if you're in that kind of situation?
So I can tell you that actually I've seen a number of folks in training classes and that kind of thing in wheelchairs. And really the big focus becomes access of the tools. While I prefer appendix position for carry, okay, AIWB carry. Obviously, there's a lot of merit to strong side carry as well. Specifically in the seated position, though, appendix position carry has a huge advantage. And my immediate reaction for anybody who's actually in a chair is consider carrying in front of your hips. The accessibility of the weaponry is so much more immediate. You can get to it with a lot less body mechanics, a lot less body mobility. Typically, when you carry strong side, you have to bend forward to some extent, right? Whereas when you're carrying your tools in front of your hips, you have immediate access to it. Other forms of carry may be completely out. For example, pocket carry is going to be a pretty bad idea if you're wheelchair bound, right? Makes it a lot harder to access. There's ways to do it, but it makes it harder to access. Ankle carry may be viable. It's all going to depend on the mobility of the individual. But I think appendix carry for your firearm is really the way to go 9 times out of 10 for anybody who is wheelchair bound. Perhaps you have no functionality at all in your legs, but you have complete functionality in your arms. That's a great way to carry your gun.
I think about that a lot when I'm in my truck or driving around town. And, there are some circumstances where I have to go to a business meeting or something and I'm in a suit and tie and I cannot carry appendix. It's just not going to happen. I cannot make it work. I might want to go to my 4 o'clock position over here, which is I can easily conceal my pistol with my blazer, my suit jacket, or whatever I'm wearing there. But because I am who I am, I go over these scenarios in my head as I'm driving down the road, stopping at stoplights, at intersections, looking right, looking left, seeing what's going on in the world out there, thinking, all right, if I have to draw my pistol, now I have to go through an extra step of sweeping my jacket aside, and then I have to move my body, get it out. That's even something that really we should think about, even as an able-bodied person, how we're carrying in a seated position, and we're in a seated position always when we're driving. Mm-hmm. That's something we should obviously keep in mind, or sitting at a desk or whatever, especially when we're driving. So we've got injuries, short-term injuries, long-term injuries, short-term disabilities, long-term disabilities, a lot of different considerations to keep in mind. We talk about that disparity of force, which really makes perfectly good sense to me now. Now I remember that phrase from back in the day, even going back to some of my law enforcement training, talking about whether you're going to, as a police officer, if you're going to file charges, then it's up to the DAs and whoever to see if those charges are going to stick, and they want to change them. And men versus women, small people versus large people, disabled people versus able people. That is definitely something to think about, because if you go through a real life scenario, and even if you are temporarily disabled or have an injury that's affecting your part of your body that you're normally used to using, it would definitely put me in fear faster for my life and make me think about escalating that force a little bit faster as well. And changing my equipment around, making sure I have that duplicate equipment on. But what about old folks? What about folks who are able but just can't move as quick? Mobility might be a little bit of an issue for folks like that. What can we suggest to those people when it comes to self-defense as a more ideal scenario?
Mm-hmm. And this, again, is common. We see this quite often as well. So for elderly people, a lot of which really have full faculties of their body, but generally there's more weakness. Older folks slow down, of course. So very often it really is a similar scenario to a disability, because really the biggest thing older folks tend to lose is the mobility, right? So whether it's a disability, or specifically we'll get into talking about people as they age, if you're lacking mobility, the first thing I would throw out there is you may also not only have always disparity of force on your side legally, but you may seriously need to think about going to force actually sooner than you would otherwise. For example, if you're in a wheelchair or even just temporarily on crutches and you're sitting in a restaurant and you're near the exit and some hoodlum comes in and is putting a gun in everybody's face, well, if you're able-bodied, you might be able just to walk out the door, right? But if it would take you 10 minutes to get out the door, you realistically might determined that the safest thing for everybody involved is to do what you need to do and neutralize that threat. The same issue comes up with for elderly people as well. They are simply not as fast. There's going to be the disparity of force always in play. You are not going to be expected to sprint down the street to get away from a mugger or whatever, right? So the mobility is an issue and the legalities of that is an issue. Going to force potentially sooner is always an issue. As far as carrying tools, I've seen a lot of folks as they age do a lot of really innovative things. As an example, my own father, who was very spry up until he passed when he was in his mid 80s, by about the time he was in his mid 70s, he resorted back to carrying revolvers, and he carried small revolvers in his pocket. Sometimes he had two of them on him. He might have one in the waistband and one in the pocket. And one thing I thought was interesting was he went through the whole gamut of firearms in his life. He was a 1911 guy back in the 90s. He was a Glock guy. He was a revolver guy way back when in the 70s and 80s, right? But in his later years, he returned to the very simple and lightweight platform of the small revolvers. And he preferred pocket carry, and he was devastatingly fast out of the pocket with that gun. But he didn't want to wear, for example, a heavy belt anymore because it would aggravate his back and other things going on, etc. So the good news is we're in the golden age of great guns, especially good lightweight carry guns. So as people get older, if they don't want to be strapped up with a heavy gun belt and these kind of things, we have a lot of options now. Pocket carry is a really great option for people as they age, and I say that because I've seen personally, not only my own father did that, I've seen a lot of people as they get older have resorted perhaps back to pocket carry with revolvers, something they may have done in the past, but as they get older, there's that comfort factor with that. And let's be realistic about it. We encourage everybody to carry as much gun as they can. If you're an 85-year-old guy, the snub-nosed revolver in your pocket will most likely get anything done that you need to do with it. Realistically, it just does, especially like my father. He could literally stage his hand on it and he could draw and hit a head at 3 or 4 yards in half a second. And he practiced that routinely. So it's a really great option. So if you want to be comfortable, another good thing older folks have going for them is they become far less fashion conscious, right? They could care less. and it's pretty
It's
standard.
true.
No, it absolutely is. And it's pretty standard for especially older men to wear very baggy shorts. It's the look. You move to Florida and you wear baggy golf shorts. Great for pocket carry. For older ladies, again, the fashion may lend itself well to carry in those less orthodox means of carrying. And of course, you do have the off-body options as well. That's where, though, we would come back to off-body carry is always possibly problematic if people get lax with where they leave that bag laying around. And as folks get older and maybe are not quite as switched on, that becomes more of an issue. So to be honest, for older folks, I like the gun on person, but there's a lot of things they can take advantage of as far as making that more comfortable.
Cool. A lot of good points there. I'm reading this article that you sent me the link on. We'll have that link below for you guys to check it out too. By a USA Carry article by Sean Holt. How old is too old to carry a concealed gun? One of the first line of that reads, "One of the hardest moments in my life was explaining to my uncle why he couldn't keep his 1911 in the nursing home." And I'm going through, I'm just going to say a similar scenario with my folks are older. My father's 87 now, convincing him not to do the things that he thinks his body can still do. Stay off the roof of the house. Don't clean out the gutters anymore. Stay off the ladders. Don't drive long trips. Things like that. I definitely kind of get it. There's some really great articles, guys. We'll have the links below. I want to remind everybody, if you enjoy our content, make sure you hit those buttons. We're not quite finished yet, but I want to remind you, like, subscribe, comment, and share. It's very important to help support that algorithm. And even by just leaving a one-word comment, hitting that like button, of course, we want you to subscribe, really helps us out a lot and helps us continue this as well. So Sal, I'm going to throw curveball at you because something we have not discussed is non-lethal tools for the elderly and disabled and how they might be employed. As we're not talking about techniques, I just want to discuss this topic with you because there have been times, I don't know if you've ever been on crutches, but I have. It's no fun. It's difficult to get to your equipment, your EDC stuff when you are on crutches, or if you're using a cane. I've even had a short time there. I messed up when I was doing some stunt work. I messed up an ankle on my right foot. I was wearing one of those rocking shoes, the big, ugly Frankenstein looking shoe. I didn't really want to use crutches. I was just a stubborn younger guy. But when I had to, I would use a cane. And that has always gone through my head. I wonder if people think about, if people have the wherewithal to think about, how can I use my disability equipment as a weapon or as a tool? Is that a legitimate thing?
It absolutely is. A cane can be a devastating weapon if you know how to use it. In fact, there's a story. It was either Rex Applegate or Fairbairn, those two British guys who were big in the formation of basically what is modern combatives training during the Second World War. I forget which one. I apologize. I forget which one it was. But one of those guys was in London and he was in his 80s at the time and he got mugged and he actually broke ribs and an arm of the two guys who mugged him with his cane. Wow. So, and those guys were like the godfathers of all of modern combatives, right? So guys who would know how to do that. So an excellent weapon, certainly. One thing about a cane, it's something that can go almost anywhere. It can go in any non-permissible environment, or even overseas. You can typically carry a cane if you have some kind of disability. And I know a lot of guys who have no disability and pretend they do so that they can carry a cane with them when they're somewhere they can't have anything else. So yes, absolutely. What we would have to think about is, does the disability interfere with your ability to really leverage that tool? Maybe, maybe not. So if you need, for example, a cane because you have trouble with one leg, you still may well be able to use that quite effectively. So yeah, that's a thing for sure, depending on what the tool is and what the level of disability is.
Years ago, I had the opportunity to participate as a volunteer at an event with some disabled veterans. It was a shooting event, which was really cool. It was a little competition. I got to see a lot of different levels of disability, physical and mental disabilities, and how they were just really dead set. This competition atmosphere really brought out their machismo and their gumption again. And some of the guys couldn't walk. Some had lost arms and legs from IDs and things over in the sand, and it was really something to see. We've covered a lot of stuff here, and we've really just scratched the surface. I'm just going to take this opportunity to address our viewers and say, guys, if this has been interesting to you, but if you would like to have a little more information on this part of the conversation, that part of the conversation, now is your opportunity to let us know easily by dropping a comment. We read the comments, and even though we may not respond to everyone, we definitely take note of what people are interested in and what kind of content you want, because that's what we're here for. We want to provide that to you. So if you want to learn a little bit more about temporarily disabilities, or maybe you are currently in one of these circumstances, or you're injured. If you are, tell us what that is and how it's affected how you're preparing to protect yourself and your loved ones, whether it's an injury, a short-term injury, long-term injury. If you're disabled, let us know what your circumstances is, and if you've had special training opportunities and what those were. We can all learn from each other. And if there is something you want to learn more about, whether it's short-term, long-term, disability, injuries, concealed carry in those circumstances. Older folks that are watching, you're legit. We want to address you. We want to provide that information to you. If you want more of that, let us know as well. And I've kind of just recapped, Sal, what we've talked about, but I'm going to give you the old elevator speech time again to just kind of recap for us.
Disability, short-term and long-term, definitely is going to change your life plan as far as carrying tools and how you're able to use those tools rather. As people age and become elderly, that also changes things greatly. Simpler tools, lighter weight tools, perhaps carrying in more convenient places on the body. We didn't really talk about this, but I mentioned a few times revolvers. For older folks, as long as the heavy trigger pull is not as big an issue, there's a lot of merit to revolvers, right? We don't have a slide to have the hand strength to rack, that sort of thing, right? Anybody can open a cylinder. So again, we're in the golden age for actual tools for defense. So these are the kind of things you want to bear in mind. And I'll mention one last thing we didn't really delve into, Denny, specifically to less lethal. Here's something for people to think about. If you are disabled or as you grow into your elderly years, less lethal is less a factor. And the reason I say that is because, again, we come back to that disparity of force. Things like OC spray, and this will shock a lot of people because a lot of times people think of pepper spray and those kind of things as something that women carry who don't want to carry a gun, right? And
Yeah.
the absurdity is a less lethal tool is no substitute at all for a lethal tool. Okay, but what the less lethal tool does is it gives you a level of force that's actually less than your hands. If you're an able-bodied man, okay, especially if you have any amount of training, your hands are a lot more potentially lethal than something like OC spray is. So I am a huge advocate of, oh, you're a 6th-degree black belt and you carry a gun every day, good, carry OC spray too, because do you really want to get into it and roll around on the ground with some guy if you can just spray them and short circuit the aggression like that? No. But as you get older, or if you're disabled, bear in mind that any kind of force that threatens you is most realistically going to be force that you have to meet with potentially lethal force. Would you, if you're 85 years old and frail, would you realistically spray somebody who's getting heated and putting hands on you with OC spray? You wouldn't legally be required to do that, most likely. And that may simply incite an incident that you don't have the mobility to get away from. So I bring people back to that. If you're disabled and if you're elderly, you're in the category where legally you're much more likely to just resort to actual lethal force. So I think the less lethal tools, I'm not saying don't carry them, certainly, but it becomes less a factor. And the other thing I'd also mention is whether it's a temporary or permanent disability, or again, old age, it puts you in a different category as far as the way criminals look at you. There has been many incidents in where you get somebody who's relatively young and very fit, and all of a sudden they're disabled, and for the first time in their life, they've been mugged. So that is because there's a perception of vulnerability there. Of course, this all factors into why does such an inordinate amount of criminals get shot by old people every year? It is like elderly people shoot criminals all the time. The biggest single reason is that criminals prey on elderly people, right? And then they make a bad selection and they prey on an elderly person who shoots them in the face. So those are things to consider, right? If you're disabled or as you get older, criminals are going to see you as food more so than if you look quite robust. And what that's maybe a bad thing, but that also can work to your favor because it's the last thing they expect if you're armed and ready for it.
Yeah, that's a good point. We laugh about it, but it's true. The statistics are there for a reason, right? Because those things happen. Now, I want to kind of just back up a little bit, even though I was kind of ready to tie this thing up. I'm thinking about realistic scenarios here in my personal life. My mother, who is 76 this year, a little more frail for her age than the average 76-year-old, asked me the other day, she said, I need you to clean your dad's guns and inspect them all, make sure we're all good if we need to use those guns as self-defense. And I said, Mom, you are not using any of Dad's firearms, which are secured, safe, good to go in that scenario, because I don't want you to. The reason I don't want her to is because I'm not sure she has the strength to pull the trigger even on a custom light triggered pistol, which I wouldn't put in her hands anyway, and nor do I think her hands are to make a shot and adhere to those 4 cardinal rules of gun safety, being in full control of your finger and your hands and your aiming and being able to hit your intended target and keeping your finger off the trigger until you're ready to fire and all that good stuff. In that instance, I told her that let me work on some other options for you to make you feel more comfortable. Someone else is not there to protect you. And my mind went to less lethal. Immediately I went to in my mind, I went to pepper spray,
Mhm.
OC spray, even having, I like options. I think options are great if you train with those options. And there's a lot of options. Pepper spray, OC spray is a common option that can be very, very, very effective, and often more effective than other options. Even I'm a certified civilian taser trainer. I teach taser classes, and yes, tasers are legal for civilians in certain circumstances, but it's easy to miss. It only works if you get both probes in, et cetera, et cetera. Other options are options that become a deterrent as well. For instance, the stun guns that don't shoot the probes as tasers, that make the sound, and everybody knows what the sound is, that fast the ticking sound. And there are good quality. I'm not talking about wish.com stuff here, but from, say, taser self-defense, the civilian side of tasers. So I'm not trying to make this a commercial for them, but it's something I'm familiar with. But they have these devices called strike lights that are flashlights, and decent flashlights that are stun guns also. Stun gun does not shoot the darts. It just causes pain on impact. But the sound is quite the deterrent, especially around animals and things like that. But it could deter a criminal as well. Something is better than nothing. I think it's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. You and I have lived by that term. We've preached that for years and years. But you need to have something. Burna, the Burna less lethal projectiles. Here's another option. Is it right for you? Study on it, train on it. We've put a lot of content on it because Burness supplied us with those products to do so at Survival Dispatch. And if you're not familiar with it, just go back down our YouTube channel, follow our socials. You'll see those products as well. But so a lot of less lethal options. And even though we're talking about that disparity of force, I do think we need to keep those less lethal items in mind for those folks that literally can't pull the trigger, or literally can't keep a hand steady enough to fire a projectile, which can go a long way and kill somebody behind and them down the road or in the next room or wherever. Whereas if you are using a less lethal tool, such as pepper spray, that worst case scenario, at least you're not going to have a stray bullet traveling here or there, and so forth. So
Well,
I just
I think you it's really valuable that you went down this rabbit hole. So just
okay.
a few minutes ago, I mentioned how for elderly and disabled, the less lethal becomes less of a thing because there's the disparity of force where realistically to fight back against any kind of real aggression, they're going to have the legal option to go to lethal force. However, you raise a fantastic point. If we're dealing with especially people as they get elderly, where now that a firearm is just not really feasible. One thing to also consider is most predation, criminal predation on the elderly is not four guys wearing body armor going into a bank, right? It's going to be criminals who are opportunists. And any kind of resistance, 99 times out of 100 works because he wants to grab a purse and run away. He doesn't want to get his face filled with OC spray, right? So that he can get caught 3 blocks away, right? So any kind of resistance is generally effective coming from, again, especially elderly people. I'm a big fan of the big canisters of bear spray. So, for example, if you have an
Yes.
elderly person living in an apartment, let's say, now again, everybody watching this realizes, yeah, bear spray, I'm going to grab my AR-15 to defend the home. Okay. Yes. But if we have somebody who's elderly, realistically, any criminal element that comes into that apartment and that person just fogs the whole room with bear spray, are they going to hang out? They're not going to hang out. Right? They're going to be back out the door because that's not what they signed up for this particular home invasion. So I think you raise an absolute fantastic point. I'll throw one last thing out about elderly people. Let's say you have somebody who is between being competent with firearms and to the point where our only realistic option is looking at these left lethal issues. Don't rule out something like a rifle chambered in 22 long rifle. No recoil, easy to manipulate. I have had a number of old folks where I have set them up with a Ruger 1022 with a red dot on it,
Oh
And
yeah.
you get a good modern dot, which can just stay on for years and not die. And it can literally sit in the closet until it's needed. Now, it's a long gun, so it doesn't have the maneuverability of a handgun, which for me, I'm a handgun, 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 then the long gun, right? But
Yep.
in a circumstance like this, so if you have 80-year-old grandma who just doesn't have the hand strength, well, if there's a home invasion and she's in her bedroom and she pulls out that Ruger 10/22 out of the closet, guess what? There's nothing that's coming through that bedroom door that will live to tell about it. So that's an option to consider as well.
Very good option. 3 points of contact with any carbine or rifle. The points being your shoulder, your grip, your forend, and immediately more stable, even with somebody who has
Yes.
shaky
Easy to
hands.
manipulate and
Easy to
powerful.
manipulate,
Out of a
and
rifle barrel, plenty of
yes.
power.
Interesting you say that because Mike the Mad Bomber, who's one of our other contributors, you guys have seen him on some other podcasts, has actually pitched the idea for us to have a discussion about how many people have actually been killed by 22 long rifle, and there have been a lot of them
Many.
as well. What a great discussion, Sal. I really
Absolutely.
appreciate your input today, addressing a topic that really needs to be addressed, and we need more. We need to discuss this more, and I think we will down the road. We'll watch our comments again, guys. Those of you who are watching us, drop those comments. Let us know, have you been in any of these scenarios? Have you had a actual self-defense scenario while you're in these circumstances? Have you had any special training while you've been injured, disabled? Are you an older person that's watching this that can relate to anything we're talking about? Let us know about that in the comments. If we get enough spike on any particular area, we'll go back, we'll address it again. I do want to remind everybody, we do have a lot of content that YouTube hates and big tech wants to shut down. Exclusive survival dispatch content. You might notice we've moved a lot of our gun stuff, our live fire stuff off the channel. That is still available to see as a survival dispatch insider. To get a lot of that great content, we'll provide a link below in the description to check that out as well. Sal, we really appreciate you, bud. What a great topic. Self-defense for the injured, the disabled, and the elderly. Thanks for watching, everybody. Make sure you hit those buttons, like, subscribe, comment, and share. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you next time.